My girlfriend and I were camping in a remote canyon in southern Utah. It wasn't an official campground, just a small sandy patch tucked beside a quiet river bend, hidden between high red rock walls. We'd been driving around all day looking for a spot like that. Secluded, away from the noise of people, no cell service, no sounds except wind and water. The kind of place that makes you feel like you're the only two people left in the world. We parked the car a mile or two back at a pull-off and hiked down through dry brush and loose rock until we reached the riverbed. The sun was already getting low when we pitched the tent. The air cooled fast after sundown, and shadows climbed up the canyon walls as we settled in. There was barely any moon that night, just a few stars visible between the cracks of the cliffs towering above us. The rock faces were steep and smooth, almost like they'd been carved by giant hands. The tent sat maybe 30 feet from the base of the western wall, the river just a short walk down a slope of soft sand and pebbles. We had a small fire going, nothing fancy, just enough for a couple mugs of tea and to warm our hands. We didn't talk much, just sat there and listened. There was a calm that came with being out there. No engines, no electricity buzzing, no other campers. The fire cracked, the river gurgled softly below, and now and then, we'd hear a breeze shift the dry branches around us. By 11 p.m. or so, we were curled up in our sleeping bags. The fire was dying down, and the night was pitch black beyond the tent walls. I remember staring up at the nylon ceiling, listening to the sound of the river and the slow rustle of the wind moving through the canyon like breath. Everything felt peaceful, cold, but still. That's when we heard it. 3 knocks, clear, sharp, evenly spaced. It sounded like someone striking solid rock with something heavy and wooden. Not a crack like rockfall, not a scuff like a small animal. These were deliberate hits. 1, 2, 3. I froze, my ears strained in the silence that followed. The knocks had come from behind the tent, toward the base of the cliff wall we'd camped near. I remember thinking maybe it was a rock loosening and tumbling down, or maybe an animal knocking something loose. But it didn't sound like that. It didn't echo like that. The sound was tight and clean, like something was being hit with intention. I didn't move at first. Neither of us did. We just lay there in the dark, completely still. Then it came again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm, same weight, but this time closer. My heartbeat jumped. I was straining so hard to listen, I didn't even notice I was holding my breath. It was like someone was walking the canyon wall and hitting it with a stick or bat, getting closer with each round. But that didn't make sense. There was no easy path on that side. Just rock wall and loose gravel. No one would be moving through that in the dark unless they knew exactly what they were doing, or unless they didn't care about being heard. I sat up slowly, careful not to make a sound. I reached for my headlamp but didn't turn it on yet. My girlfriend was already sitting up too. I could hear her breathing slow and deep like me, trying not to panic. A few minutes passed. Nothing. Then the knocks came again, but from the opposite side. 3 knocks, even, loud, from across the canyon. That side had the river below it and a steep rise of rock. Same deliberate rhythm, same heavy thud against stone. Like an answer, I felt a wave of cold pass through me that had nothing to do with the night air. It was like someone or something was signaling across the canyon. The precision of it unnerved me more than anything. Whatever was making the noise wasn't stumbling around. It wasn't random. It had a pattern, a rhythm, and now it had a reply. I leaned forward and slowly unzipped the tent. The night outside was darker than I expected. I flipped on the headlamp, keeping the beam low, sweeping the ground near the tent first, then lifting it slowly toward the walls. The beam hit nothing but dirt, sagebrush, and solid red rock. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. There was no reason for anyone to be out there. Not at that time of night. Not that deep into the canyon. No one had passed us on the trail. No cars were parked at the pull-off besides ours. No sign of footprints when we set up camp. We were alone when we arrived. We were sure of it. But those knocks didn't come from nothing. We didn't wait around for a 4th round. We packed up. It took us less than 5 minutes to tear down the tent and stuff everything into our packs. I didn't bother rolling anything properly. just jammed it all in. Every few seconds, I'd stop and scan with the headlamp. The silence after the knocks was almost worse. Like the air was waiting, like we weren't meant to be there anymore. We turned and started hiking back toward the car. The trail was narrow, rough, and wound upward through brush and loose stone. It was even harder in the dark, even with the headlamps. Every noise felt like something following. The wind moved through the trees in quick bursts, making shadows shift. Branches cracked under our boots and echoed like distant movement. We kept glancing behind us, checking the darkness, convinced we'd see someone or something just standing still watching. But we never did. The hike back felt longer than the hike in. My legs were stiff from adrenaline and cold. Every time I thought I heard a sound behind us, I'd stop and listen. Most of the time, it was just my imagination playing tricks, but a few times, I wasn't so sure. Once, I thought I heard footsteps behind us, steady, crunching on gravel, but when I stopped, they stopped too. We didn't speak, not because we didn't want to, but because there was nothing to say that would make sense. Nothing we could tell ourselves that would explain what we'd heard. It was almost 1 a.m. when we reached the car. I remember fumbling with the keys, trying to unlock the doors as fast as I could. The second we were inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. The headlights flared out over the trailhead. Nothing moved. The canyon behind us was just darkness and silence. We didn't sleep that night. We drove until we hit the next town. Some tiny place with a gas station and a motel with a broken neon sign. We checked in and sat on the bed, still in our dusty clothes, not speaking, just thinking about those knocks. We tried to rationalize it later. Maybe it was echo. Maybe rocks fell in a weird pattern. Maybe some hiker got turned around and was trying to find their bearings. But none of those ideas sat right. The knocks were too precise, too clean, not something that happened by chance. They were evenly spaced, like someone keeping time. And the second set, coming from the opposite wall like an answer, that was what got me the most. That meant there were at least two sources of the sound. 2 points, 2 signals, and they weren't random. I've been in the backcountry plenty. I've heard all kinds of strange noises, owls, coyotes, even mountain lions. I've seen weird shadows, heard weird stories. But this felt different. It wasn't a sound that tried to scare us off with growls or movement. It was a message. Simple, measured, confident. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. Then an answer. Whatever was out there didn't chase us, didn't show itself, but it wanted us to hear it. It wanted us to know it was there. We haven't gone back to that canyon. I've looked at it on maps, even tried to retrace the spot where we camped. But I can't find the exact place again. Maybe that's for the best. There's a lot of land out there, a lot of places people don't go, and maybe there are reasons for that. Sometimes when it's quiet at night, I still think about those knocks. Not loud, not violent, just present, just intentional. And I think the scariest thing about it wasn't what we heard. It was what we didn't see. I was hiking part of the Continental Divide Trail in New Mexico in early April. The section I was on was dry and quiet, with the kind of stillness you only get in the desert. I'd been walking most of the day, maybe 15 miles, and my shoulders were sore from the pack. My legs were tight, and the sun was sinking low by the time I started looking for a spot to camp. There was a good bit of wind kicking up in the afternoon. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make the brush rattle and whistle. I didn't want to camp on an exposed ridge with the wind rolling in. So I dipped down into a shallow gully lined with some scraggly junipers and dry grasses. That's when I found it. This old campsite off the trail, maybe 30 or 40 feet into the brush. It wasn't marked, wasn't on any map, but you could tell someone had put time into it once. There was a crude fire ring built out of stones, blackened from years of use, and logs arranged in a rough circle like a sitting area. It looked like no one had used it in a while, but it was still solid. I remember thinking it had a strange feel, not bad exactly, just forgotten, like it had once been a regular stopping point and then, for whatever reason, people just stopped coming. I dropped my pack with a grunt and sat on one of the logs for a bit, catching my breath and letting my back relax. I pitched my tent off to the side where the ground was level, not far from the ring. I didn't bother with a fire. The wind had settled, but I didn't feel like risking anything. I cooked a dehydrated meal on my stove, ate while watching the last of the sun fade over the hills, then brushed my teeth and settled into my bag. I was tired, more tired than I realized. I remember hearing coyotes in the distance and the faint hum of wind through the branches. After that, I was out. Sometime around midnight, maybe a bit after, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. There was no sound, nothing obvious. The kind of wake up where your body just decides it's time to be alert. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the thin mesh of the tent ceiling. The moon was out, so there was a pale light washing over everything. I could see shadows from the trees stretching across the nylon. That's when I heard it, a soft crunch in the brush. One step, then another. It wasn't fast, slow and careful. I held my breath, listening. I thought it might be a deer or something like that, maybe even a javelina, but the steps weren't random or shuffling like animals make. They were deliberate, pacing, like someone circling. I stayed frozen for a while, ears straining, waiting for it to pass. Then it stopped. After a long minute, I convinced myself it was nothing serious. Maybe just my mind playing games. You spend enough nights alone in the woods and your brain starts turning every sound into something bigger than it is. I turned over, tried to go back to sleep, but around 1 a.m., I heard it, laughter. A man's voice, low and drawn out. Not loud, just enough to drift through the trees. One slow, deep chuckle. It didn't sound right, not like someone joking around. It was the kind of laugh you give when something amuses you in a dark way. Not a joyful laugh. More like the sound of someone who finds something funny when they shouldn't. I shot upright in my bag, heart pounding. My hand went for my headlamp and flicked it on, lighting up the tent and the area around me in a dull beam. I sat there, listening. The laugh didn't come again. I thought maybe someone else had shown up late, maybe a hunter or a ranch hand. I called out once just to see. Nothing. The wind had completely died down. The brush wasn't moving. It was dead still. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the headlamp within reach, the knife from my cook kit beside me. I didn't hear anything else, but I stayed alert the rest of the night, mind turning over every possibility. Someone messing with me? Maybe a hiker on something? Or just passing through? But why laugh? Why not answer when I called? The night dragged on. Every sound put me on edge. The little ticks and creaks that come with the cooling ground, the distant yips of coyotes. All of it felt like it could be something worse. Eventually the sky began to lighten, and I waited until there was enough daylight before I got out of the tent. I looked around carefully, scanning the edges of the brush. I expected to see someone else nearby, maybe a tent I hadn't noticed before, but there was nothing. Just the trail, the old campsite, and the silent desert. That's when I noticed them. 3 cigarette butts near the log I'd been sitting on the night before. They were fresh, new enough that the paper hadn't faded or cracked from the weather. The filters were pinched flat, like whoever smoked them had stubbed them out with care. I don't smoke. I've never smoked, and I would have seen them while eating the night before. They were right at my feet. Whoever had been there had come after me. Then I saw the drag marks, not far from the log, just a few feet off to the side where the dirt was looser. It looked like something heavy had been pulled into the brush, not in a straight line, but in short, jerking drags. The kind of marks you'd see if someone had pulled a pack or a tarp full of gear. But there were no boot prints, no paw prints, just the smooth, broken trail through the dirt and dry grass. I followed it a little way. It curved into the trees and stopped suddenly behind a thick juniper. The ground there was disturbed, like someone had stood or knelt in one place for a long time. But whatever had been there was gone. I stood there, staring at the spot, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't enough to prove anything. Nothing to say exactly what had been dragged. But it looked off. Human, not animal. And the cigarette butts, they were fresh. Someone had been there with me in the night, not far from where I slept. I packed fast, I didn't even eat breakfast. I had half a liter of water left and maybe 5 or 6 miles to the next cache I'd left near a dirt road crossing. I didn't stop to check my phone, didn't double-check my bearings. I just wanted out of there. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be following. Not close, just keeping pace somewhere behind me, just out of sight. That whole day, I felt off. Not scared exactly, but raw. Like my nerves had been filed down and every little thing scraped against them. The kind of feeling that makes you want to get back to town, even if you don't know why. When I made it to the road, I considered sticking out my thumb and bailing to the nearest town. I stood there for 10, maybe 15 minutes just thinking, but I didn't. I grabbed my water, refilled, and kept walking. The trail ahead looked quiet, clean. Nothing like the place I'd left. I didn't tell anyone about it until weeks later. Not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but because there was nothing to say that proved anything had happened. No person, no real sign of violence. Just a few cigarette butts and some marks in the dirt. But that laugh, it stuck with me. I can't describe it well enough. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't loud. It was calm, measured, and it had no business being out there in the dark, miles from anyone. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I'm camped alone. It taught me something, not about ghosts or monsters or anything like that, but about people, about how the scariest thing in the woods isn't what you can imagine. It's what you don't see, what chooses not to be seen. And I know this much. Someone was out there that night. They watched me. Maybe they meant no harm. Maybe they were just passing through. But they stayed long enough to smoke 3 cigarettes, and they dragged something off into the brush. I never found out what it was, and I never went back to that part of the trail again. Last fall, I went solo camping in northern Wisconsin, near the edge of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. I picked a spot off a narrow, rutted dirt road that barely looked traveled anymore. One of those pull-offs that had no sign, no fire pit, no evidence anyone had used it in years. That's exactly what I wanted. No alcohol, no fire, just me, a tent, the cool air, and the sounds of the woods. I was trying to reset myself, get away from screens, stress, and people. I wanted quiet, space, and maybe a little challenge. It was mid-October, and the temperature had dropped faster than usual that year. The leaves were already past peak color, with many of them browned and fallen, leaving the trees looking bare and crooked in the moonlight. The air was sharp and damp, the kind that gets in your nose and lungs and reminds you that winter isn't far. The sun had set early, like it always does in fall, and by 6:30 it was already dark. I set up my tent in a flat spot between 2 thick pines. The underbrush around me was patchy, mostly dry leaves and tall grass. To my right, maybe 30 feet away, the trees started to thicken into a dense patch of forest that looked nearly black once the sun disappeared. I laid out my gear carefully. Sleeping pad, sleeping bag, a small journal, bear spray, water, flashlight, and a knife I kept more for peace of mind than anything else. My food bag was strung up and away from my tent, following proper backcountry rules. I spent the evening just sitting outside the tent, watching the light fade, listening to the squirrels rustling and the wind moving through the trees. A few owls called out now and then, but it was quiet, and that quiet had a weight to it. No car sounds, no distant barking dogs, just forest. I remember thinking how much noise we're used to in our daily lives, and how complete silence can mess with your head. I turned in early. Without a fire, there wasn't much to do once the dark settled in. I crawled into the tent, zipped myself in, and turned on my headlamp just low enough to write in my journal. I jotted down simple things. What I saw, how cold it was, what I was thinking about. I remember writing that I felt calm, and how rare that feeling was lately. That part makes what happened next all the more jarring. It was just after midnight. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, was still scribbling down a few final thoughts when I heard it. A sharp snap, not a big crash like a tree falling or a branch breaking high above. This was the kind of snap you hear when someone steps on a dry stick. Quick, clean, too close. I froze. My headlamp was still on. I clicked it off immediately. Everything went black. My eyes strained against the dark. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just sat there, back pressed against the side of the tent, heart pounding in my ears. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a raccoon. That's what I wanted to believe. But the sound had been heavier than that. It sounded like weight, like mass. A minute passed, then another. That's when I saw them, two eyes, reflecting the faint moonlight. They were greenish, low to the ground, maybe 30 feet away, just at the edge of the thicker trees. Wide apart, unmoving. They weren't bobbing like deer eyes sometimes do. They weren't twitching or looking around. They were staring straight at the tent, straight at me. I stayed still, trying to remember everything I knew about animal behavior. Deer don't usually hold still like that for that long. Coyotes might, but the eyes looked too far apart. Maybe it was a bear. I reached slowly for the can of bear spray next to my sleeping bag and held it tight. My hands were cold and sweaty at the same time. The eyes disappeared, just blinked out. No sound, no movement, just gone. I waited, barely breathing. Then I saw them again, closer, off to the left now, maybe 20 feet away, still low, still fixed on the tent. My mind ran through every possibility. If it was a bear, why was it circling? Bears don't usually stalk like that. Coyotes tend to avoid people unless they're sick or starving. And if it was a person, why weren't they saying anything? The eyes vanished again, reappeared behind the tent this time. My blood ran cold. Whatever it was circling me, testing the perimeter. And that's when I heard it. Breathing, not animal breathing, not snorting or sniffing or huffing. It was low, slow, deliberate, heavy, like someone standing just a few feet away, trying to stay quiet but too close not to hear. It was the kind of sound that makes your spine go stiff. Human breathing. I didn't move. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't call out. I didn't even look behind me. I just gripped the bear spray tighter and waited. I was trying to control my own breathing, but it felt impossible. My chest felt like it was going to explode. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped. Nothing replaced it. No footsteps. No more eye shine. Just silence. I sat frozen in that position for over an hour, bear spray in one hand, knife in the other. Every few minutes, I'd flick on the headlamp just for a second to see if anything was out there. Nothing. Every time, nothing. Couldn't sleep. Not even a little. I just waited. I must have checked my watch 20 times between 1 and 5 in the morning. At first light, I didn't pack anything up. I just grabbed what I could, left the tent and most of my gear behind, and walked back to the road as fast as I could. Took me nearly 2 hours to reach my car. I didn't stop once to rest. When I finally got back, I drove straight out of the woods and didn't look back. I made it to a small town gas station and sat in the parking lot for almost half an hour just trying to breathe normally again. I kept telling myself it was probably a bear, or maybe a sick animal, maybe even just my imagination playing tricks on me after too many hours in the dark. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. A week later, I went back in the middle of the day with a friend to collect the gear I'd left behind. My tent was still there, undisturbed. So was my food bag. But there were boot prints in the dirt. Not mine, not my friends. They were older, deep, and they circled the tent. 3 separate paths, just like the eyes. I didn't report it. I didn't tell many people either. What would I say? That someone or something circled my tent and breathed outside it all night? That I saw eyes that moved like a predator, but heard footsteps that didn't belong to an animal? Sounds crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I've been camping since I was a kid. I've seen bears. I've had coyotes come close. I've had gear stolen, tents flooded, and storms tear through camp at night. But nothing, not a single experience, ever left me as shaken as that night in the northern woods. I still go camping, but not alone anymore. Not without a fire, and not in that part of Wisconsin. I'm careful now. I set up near other people when I can. I carry more than just bear spray. I don't wear earbuds or zone out, and I never, ever ignore the sound of a single snapped twig. because I learned something real that night. Out there in the quiet, past the end of the road, where no one can hear you scream, not everything you hear in the woods is just an animal. And sometimes the scariest things don't growl, they breathe. Two years ago, I took my nephew camping in the Appalachians. He was about 8 at the time, a good kid, full of energy and curiosity. His parents were going through a rough patch and needed a weekend to themselves, so I offered to take him out into the woods for a couple days. It was early October, one of those crisp weekends where the leaves had just hit their peak colors. Bright red, orange, and gold blanketed the mountains. I figured it would be the perfect chance to get him away from screens and into something real, something he'd remember. We parked at a trailhead just off a gravel road that cut through the edge of the forest. It wasn't an official campground, but I knew of a quiet spot down a side trail that followed a creek for a couple miles. I'd camped there twice before, once by myself and once with a friend from college. Nobody really came out that way. The hike-in wasn't too tough, and the reward was a flat clearing right next to a bend in the creek, with a big smooth boulder you could sit on and watch the water. The hike-in went well. My nephew was a little tired near the end, but he was a trooper. We made it to the spot around mid-afternoon. The sun was still high enough that it filtered through the trees in that golden way, lighting up the clearing in warm patches. We set up the tent about 15 feet from the creek, close enough to hear the water but far enough to be safe if it rained. After that, we gathered wood and made a fire pit. I showed him how to dig a shallow ring and surround it with stones. He liked that part, said it felt like building something secret. We cooked hot dogs on sticks and roasted marshmallows after dark. He kept looking at the stars and saying how he couldn't believe how many there were. I forgot how different the sky looks when you're away from towns and roads. We stayed up until maybe 9:30 or 10 just talking. Mostly him asking questions about animals and camping, and me doing my best to answer. He fell asleep fast once we got in the tent. I remember listening to the creak and the crackle of the last bits of firewood outside, thinking how peaceful it felt. I read a bit on my phone before the battery ran low, and then I let myself drift off. No weird vibes, no strange sounds, just a cool, quiet night deep in the woods. Around 3 a.m., I woke up. It wasn't a sudden jolt, more like a slow return to awareness. The kind you get when your brain tells you something feels off, even before your eyes open. First, I just listened. The creek was still running, but there was something else. It sounded like whispering, very faint, almost like wind through dry grass. My first thought was that my nephew was talking in his sleep. I turned toward him. He was curled up in his sleeping bag, facing away from me. His breathing was steady, but the whispering kept going. It didn't sound like him. It didn't have that sleepy mumble tone kids get. It sounded too deliberate, like someone trying to talk without being heard. I sat up, unzipped the sleeping bag halfway, and leaned closer to the tent wall. The whispering seemed to be coming from outside, maybe 20 or 30 feet away, toward the creek. I froze for a few seconds, listening. Two voices, one low, the other higher pitched. Both sounded like children. I didn't move right away. I just sat there trying to make sense of it. My brain went through the options. Maybe another family camped nearby and the kids had snuck out, but we hadn't passed anyone on the trail. No other tents. No signs of campfires or gear. It was miles from the nearest lot, and most people didn't go that far in with kids. Still, I unzipped the tent slowly and stuck my head out. The moon was bright enough to see the clearing and the top of the creek bend. The fire was out, just a faint glow of embers. The whispering stopped the moment I looked out. I scanned the area, heart thudding. That's when I saw it. A small figure crouched by the edge of the water. It looked like a kid, skinny, with a hoodie or something pulled up over the head, just squatting there, still as a rock. Not facing me, but not fully turned away either. Maybe 10 yards out. I stood up fast and shouted. I don't even remember what I said. Something like, "Hey, who's there?" Just noise. My nephew stirred behind me, groggy and confused, asking what was going on. I didn't answer. My eyes were still locked on the creek, but the figure was gone. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. No splash, no rustling leaves, just gone. I walked out to where it had been, flashlight in hand. Scanned the bank, the woods, even the other side of the creek. Nothing. The grass where it had crouched wasn't pressed down, at least not in any way I could see. No footprints. The only tracks were ours from earlier. My nephew got out of the tent and stood behind me, clearly nervous. I told him it was probably nothing. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe it was a deer or something else that had moved weird. But I didn't believe it myself. We didn't sleep after that. Just sat in the tent with the lantern on, waiting for dawn. Every sound outside felt louder. A squirrel in the brush made me flinch. When the light finally started coming through the trees, I packed everything up fast. We ate granola bars instead of cooking breakfast. My nephew didn't say much. He kept looking at the creek. We hiked out as soon as we could see the trail clearly. The woods looked the same as they always had, but I felt like something was watching us the whole time. We didn't pass anyone on the way out. No other camps, no fresh tracks on the trail. The parking lot was empty. It always amazed me how that part of the mountains could feel so cut off. When we got back to the car, I locked the doors without thinking. We drove in silence for a while before my nephew finally asked, "Who was that by the water?" I didn't know what to say. I just told him I didn't know. But we were safe now. And we were. I never reported it. What would I even say? That I saw a kid out in the woods at 3 in the morning who vanished without a sound? That there were voices but no footprints? I didn't want to scare my nephew or his parents, and I couldn't explain any of it clearly. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. Since then, I haven't camped in that spot again. I still go into the woods, but I stick to marked campgrounds or places I know will have other people nearby. Something about being that alone with a kid and not knowing what was out there rattled me more than I expected. I think about it sometimes. Not every day, but often enough. Mostly when I'm out hiking or when the house is quiet late at night. It wasn't supernatural. At least I don't think it was. But it was real. There was someone out there. Maybe a runaway, maybe someone living off-grid, or maybe just some disturbed person who wanders at night. Whatever the case, they were there, watching us, whispering. I don't think they meant harm, or they would have done something. But they were too quiet, too close, too careful. That's what stays with me. It wasn't just some animal. It wasn't the wind. It was human, and I don't know what they wanted. We were lucky nothing happened. That's the part one keep reminding myself. But I don't take chances like that anymore, especially not with kids. When you're out in the woods that far from help, you're on your own. And sometimes you find out you're not as alone as you thought. It was just me and my dog, camping off an old logging road in Idaho. Late September, just past the edge of shoulder season. Most tourists were gone. The air was cool, the days shorter, and the nights colder. I'd been planning the trip for a while, wanting something quiet, away from towns and people and all the noise that came with them. Just me, the woods, and the quiet. I'd driven about 6 miles off the main road, the kind of road you only take if you're looking for it. The kind where the gravel hums differently under your tires, like it hasn't seen traffic in weeks. The logging road snaked through thick lodgepole pines and sloped down into a small valley with a shallow creek that barely moved this time of year. I had no cell signal since I left the highway 2 hours earlier. Didn't really expect one. That's how I wanted it. My dog, Boone, a 6-year-old lab mix, rode shotgun the whole way, ears perked, eyes scanning like he always did when we were heading into the woods. We found a clearing just before dark, tucked off a smaller spur trail that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Old beer cans and some blackened fire ring told me someone had camped here before, but it looked long abandoned. A good spot, flat ground, trees for cover, and enough space to back the truck in and turn around if I had to leave in a hurry. I set up camp quick, just the basics. 2-man tent, small fire pit, my folding chair. Threw some kibble in Boone's dish and heated up a can of stew over the fire. The air dropped fast once the sun dipped behind the ridge. cold enough for a beanie and flannel. Boone laid close to the fire, his head on his paws, eyes watching the dark around us. Nothing much happened that evening. I watched the stars come out, a few satellites skimming across the sky. No planes, no headlights, just trees and wind and the pop of the fire. Around 10, I doused the flames, zipped us both into the tent, and laid there listening to the silence. That's one thing you don't realize until you're deep enough in. It's not loud. It's not quiet either. There's a kind of pressure in the silence, like the woods are holding their breath. I fell asleep easy, Boone curled against my legs, the tent just barely lit by the moon. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up, not the kind of half sleep where you turn over and drift back. I mean wide awake, my body stiff, breathing shallow, like something pulled me out of a dream. At first I thought it was the cold. My nose was freezing, but then I heard it. Crunch. A slow, deliberate sound. Not branches snapping or leaves blowing. Not an animal scurrying. This was gravel. Gravel under boots. 1 foot, then another. Crunch. Crunch. My heart picked up. I stayed still, holding my breath. Boone was still curled up at my feet, not making a sound. That was the first thing that felt wrong. He should have barked. I leaned up slowly, unzipped the sleeping bag just enough to free my arms, and reached for the knife I kept next to me. A small fixed blade. Nothing fancy, but enough to put in someone's ribs if I needed to. Crunch. Then nothing. I waited, listening hard. No owls. No wind. Just that silence again, thick and pressing. I crawled toward the tent flap, as slow and quiet as I could. My fingers found the zipper, and I opened it just enough to peek out. The moon gave me just enough light to see the clearing. My truck was about 50 feet away, parked where I'd left it. Nothing else. No people, no movement. The trees just stood there like always. Then I noticed it. The dome light inside the cab was on. My chest tightened. I knew I hadn't left it like that. I hadn't opened the doors since unloading earlier. I'd walked around the truck before dark, double-checking the locks. I always did that, but there it was, that soft yellow glow, a faint outline of the dash and the front seats. Driver's side facing the tent, nothing moving inside. I watched, eyes stinging from not blinking, waited for someone to step out, waited for movement. Nothing. Boone didn't move. He hadn't even lifted his head. That more than anything chilled me. He'd always been alert, would bark at a squirrel cracking pine cones back home. But now, nothing. I stayed frozen, knife in hand, watching that light glow in the truck. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been an hour. My back cramped. My fingers got numb from the cold. Still I didn't move. And then, without warning, the light shut off. Just blinked out. No door slam. No sound. Just dark again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the tent, knife clutched tight, eyes darting between the flap and Boone, trying to hear anything out of place. But the woods were still. I waited until the sky lightened, a dull gray rising behind the trees. That in-between time before real dawn, when everything looks flat and wrong. I stepped out of the tent, knife still in hand, walked slowly toward the truck. The ground was cold underfoot. Dew clung to everything. The fire ring was untouched. The passenger door was cracked open. Not wide, just a few inches, enough to see the edge of the seat. I walked around the front, heart hammering. No footprints, no tire tracks but mine. No sign of anyone walking into camp. I pulled the door open fully and looked inside. The glove box was open, papers pulled out, scattered across the floor. My registration, insurance card, a couple old maps, a flashlight. Nothing was missing. Even the cash I kept folded in a napkin in the center console was still there. Everything just looked messed with, like someone rummaged through it in a hurry and left without taking anything. I checked the rest of the truck, the back seat, the bed. Underneath, nothing. No damage, no signs of forced entry. My keys were still in my tent, zipped inside my pack. Boone finally stepped out of the tent, stretched, and shook himself off like it was any normal morning. Sniffed around the truck, tail wagging slow. No tension, no fear, like nothing had happened. That bugged me. We ate a quick breakfast, dry oatmeal and jerky, and I packed everything up. I didn't want to stay another night. I didn't even want to stay another hour. I drove out slow, tires crunching over the same gravel that woke me up. I watched the mirrors the whole way, eyes flicking from trees to the road behind me, half expecting to see someone step out into the path. But no one did. Back on the highway, signal returned just outside of a small town about 30 miles away. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for a while, doors locked, staring at my truck. Nothing made sense. I ran through it again and again. Whoever it was had to be on foot. I would have heard a vehicle. That road was too rough for anything quiet. But even if they walked, why mess with my truck and leave? Why not take something? And how'd they get the door open? And then there was Boone. I trusted that dog more than most people. He'd always barked, always alerted me to animals or strangers. But that night, nothing. No growl, no whine, no movement. Just stillness. I thought about it for a long time. Maybe someone local, someone who knew the back roads and used them for whatever reason. Could have been someone camping illegally, or a squatter, or someone hiding something, or maybe it wasn't about theft. That thought sat wrong in my stomach. I couldn't explain why, but it felt personal, like someone was checking me out, seeing what kind of person I was, seeing how I'd react. They could have done worse. They didn't slash my tires, didn't take my gear, didn't even make noise, just came in, poked around, and left. But that was what unsettled me the most. It wasn't some tweaker or drunk kid messing around. It felt deliberate, thought out, a quiet test. I didn't report it. Didn't seem like the kind of thing that would go anywhere. What would I say? Someone opened my truck while I was asleep and didn't steal anything? Instead, I changed how I camp. I don't go that deep alone anymore, not without a second person or at least a satellite communicator. I added locks to the inside of my truck's doors. I bring a headlamp and a bigger knife, and I never ignore the small things anymore. An open door, a missing sound, a quiet dog, because whatever happened that night wasn't loud. It wasn't violent, but it was wrong. Deeply, bone-cold wrong in a way that leaves you looking over your shoulder even years later. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. Sometimes it's the fact that someone was watching, that they got close enough to touch your things, close enough to decide not to hurt you, this time. And the next time I hear crunching gravel in the dark, I won't wait an hour to see what comes next.